Hello guys, welcome back to Unfiltered. As the invasion on Iran and blockade of Hormuz shocking the world, minimal media report focused on Israel pressing assault and killing in Lebanon. Is J.D. Vance leaving Islamabad with no deal made with Iranians? Lebanese and Israeli ambassador to the United States set to meet on Tuesday in Washington. Beirut will use face-to-face negotiations to press for a ceasefire in a world that has complicated wider diplomacy to halt the conflict in the Middle East. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Professor Makhdi Disi, Associate Professor from American University of Beirut with us. Thank you for being here, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Professor, Israel's military assault is causing hundreds of casualties in a single day and destroying key bridges connecting southern Lebanon with other regions. Although they say it's all targeting Hezbollah, many being reported how IDF causing indiscriminate causality even on Christian villages that have nothing to do with Hezbollah. So how do Lebanese interpret this core purpose of Israel's military operation?
Well, there's no question that the Israelis have been hitting civilians across Lebanon. I mean, obviously, South Lebanon in particular, they've been ethnically cleansing people along the border. They've been utterly destroying. It's not just targeting some houses here and there. They've been utterly destroying the entire length of certain villages that are within 1, 2, 3 kilometers of the border, and they're trying to expand that zone. They have been in occupation of Lebanon for many, many years. Before that, they've been attacking civilians since I was born. I mean, there've been Israeli invasions and occupations and attacks. So this is a very long-standing history of Israeli violence towards Lebanon and occupation. So they have been hitting civilians. They claim that every time they hit somewhere, they say they're hitting Hezbollah, but in fact, for the most part, they kill civilians. Just yesterday, they killed a family in south of Lebanon. On Wednesday, I was here and I'm in Beirut, and they did this attack where 100 different assaults, missiles, and within 10 minutes across Beirut and across Lebanon, and they killed over 350 people, the vast majority of whom were civilians. We saw images of, children killed, old ladies, the usual thing that we've been seeing across the genocide in Gaza and in Palestine, the same kind of pictures, same kind of images. The Israelis have been hitting ambulances, they've been hitting hospitals, they've been hitting first responders. They've been hitting civilian bridges. They've been hitting water places. They hit everything and everybody. And whenever they do so, they then say, oh, we've hit Hezbollah. Oh, we've hit Hezbollah. We've hit Hezbollah. So that's just in terms of the facts of the matter and the history and the facts of the matter. That, of course, we could talk more about that. In terms of the reaction within Lebanon, the country is split. Politically, the country is split. There are those, obviously, who support Hezbollah and support the resistance. And who understand that Israel is an existential threat to Lebanon. And there are those who don't support the Israelis, but who think that the presence of Hezbollah and the presence of Hezbollah's weapons attracts the Israelis to Lebanon. So, if Hezbollah were to be disarmed, then the Israelis would not need to come to Lebanon, would not need to attack Lebanon. So that's the basic split within Lebanon itself.
So we heard that a lot in China, that IDF would warn with leaflets and text messages before their attacks. So we rarely hear from Lebanese in China. So that is one of the most used example why Netanyahu is eulogizing IDF as so-called the most moral military in the world. So did IDF actually warn Lebanese before attacks?
No, what they do is everything they do, factually speaking, everything they do is contrary to international law, the laws of war, and humanitarian law. There's no doubt about this, and you can go look at any of the UN documents to kind of confirm this. So this is not even a question of debate. This is a question of fact. When the Israelis, so what they're referring to is that the Arabic-speaking spokesperson for the Israeli army sometimes, not always, but sometimes will say, here, there's a district. They put it in red. They literally put up a map on Twitter or something, and they put a little map and they put red lines, and they say everybody within this district or this area has to clear out, literally. So it's like taking very large areas and telling and by the way, they give them half an hour, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour. And this would often be in the middle of the night. So they'll, it'd be like 11 p.m. And not everybody's sitting on Twitter at 11 p.m., right? So they would come there and say, everybody within this 10-kilometer radius has to evacuate. Old ladies, sick people, hospitals very often, schools, kids, whatever you want, all that stuff. Everybody has to leave and evacuate in 10 minutes. That's the kind of warning that they are, pretending to do in order to be more civilized. It's not. It's against humanitarian law. It's collective punishment. It's barbarous. It's violent. Very often, they don't even give these warnings. As I said last Wednesday, where they killed 350 people across Lebanon, including a lot of people inside Beirut and right next to us, in fact, they didn't give any warnings. It was in the middle of the day. They came and they attacked literally in the middle of the day when people were out and about. It was a nice sunny day. People were out and about, shopping, in the grocery stores, and those that were going to schools were going to schools, and they killed over 300 people without any warning, and that's the typical way that the Israelis operate. Of course, they then say, "Oh, these are all Hezbollah operatives." Like, come on, that's ridiculous, and this is documented through the NGOs, through the UN, through everybody. It's very, very much understood that the Israelis attack civilians all the time, that they have by far the highest rates of killing civilians among the dead. Then, for example, if you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, if you look at other wars, what the Israelis have done in Gaza, what they're doing in Lebanon, what they do, generally speaking, is that the casualty rates, the percentage of civilians to combatants is extremely high. And this is, again, factual. Everybody understands this, and everybody understands this is the Israeli way of operating. So they will say, "Oh, here's one guy that we want to get in some apartment building." So they don't mind taking the entire apartment building down, killing 200 people in the process, and terrorizing the rest of the population to get one person. And that one person may or may not even be there. And they may or may not be an important person. But they want to give themselves the right to do so. So it's not a moral army. It is probably the single most terrorist army that exists on planet Earth.
Well, Netanyahu claimed that Lebanon is not within the scope of the so-called ceasefire or suspension of attack whatsoever, while Iran accused this act of violating the ceasefire terms it proposed. We learned Iranian FM foreign minister commented on this, saying it must be Netanyahu escaping from criminal corruption case domestically, but we did not hear from Lebanese. So, Professor, what are some underlying considerations you'd address to our audience why Netanyahu is claiming that Lebanon is not in the ceasefire whatsoever?
Well, as I said, the split within Lebanon is interesting in if you want to think about it in political terms. So the Lebanese government position, and this particular Lebanese prime minister and government is against Hezbollah. They don't like Hezbollah, is that they are saying, look, Iran, as part of its conditions for the regional agreement with the United States, or for starting negotiations with the United States, was that there should be a ceasefire, not just vis-a-vis Iran itself, but across the region. So including in Yemen, including in Iraq, including in Syria, and including in Lebanon. And what the Lebanese government said was, we prefer that we make our own decisions, that Iran doesn't speak on our behalf, and we want to have direct negotiations with the Israelis and come to an agreement ourselves, right? Netanyahu, the day after Trump came up and they announced the ceasefire, the day after was when this thing that I just mentioned, when they killed 350 people. So their way of saying we don't accept the ceasefire in Lebanon was by launching 100 attacks and killing 350 civilians in Lebanon. The Lebanese government, as I said, is saying we want to separate the tracks and create a bilateral track between the Israelis and the Lebanese under American mediation, separate from the Iranian-American negotiations. Now, a lot of people say, well, that doesn't make sense because the Lebanese government doesn't have much of a negotiating position. They don't have very much to give. They're not the ones who are fighting. It's Hezbollah, it's the resistance forces in South Lebanon that are fighting. So it's not the Lebanese army that's fighting. So what is it that the Lebanese government has to give? It's not very clear. They're saying Iran is in a stronger position to be able to impose this and at least get a ceasefire, to give people a little bit of respite in South Lebanon, but in Lebanon as a whole. And tomorrow, Tuesday, is when the Lebanese and Israelis ambassadors to America are supposed to meet in Washington, D.C. I think it's basically symbolic because it's quite low-level delegation. There's been very, very little preparation. There's nobody going. It's just the two ambassadors basically, and I think it's a symbolic meeting in order to say that negotiations have begun, because nobody's prepared for this. And the best that people are hoping for is that there can be at least some kind of outcome under American pressure to say, okay, let there be some kind of ceasefire. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Israelis, at best, if they're put under pressure by the United States, is they'll say, okay, well, we won't attack Beirut for now, but we'll continue attacking in South Lebanon. And we insist that the Lebanese army and the Lebanese government goes in and disarms Hezbollah now in the middle of this war. So I'm not sure where that will go or how effective that will be.
Do you think the not attacking Beirut is what U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said, I believe yesterday or the day before yesterday, saying Israel promised him to exercise some kind of restraint on Lebanon issue, that bombing or operations are going to be less severe. But as we talk right now, it's still killing. I just saw ABC or NBC said is killing 14 more civilians. So how do you evaluate the U.S. stance in this escalation of the current Israel-Lebanon situation?
But it's clear that when Donald Trump accepted to negotiate with the Iranians, they accepted it on the basis, and this was through the Pakistani mediators. It was clear that Lebanon was included in the regional ceasefire. I mean, it literally said so. And the Pakistani prime minister had tweeted this. So, this is fairly clear. What we know is that Netanyahu then called up Trump and said, no, we don't want this. Lebanon has to be separate. Trump, as usual, starts to backslide and say, well, yes, okay, it's true, Lebanon is not part of this. So, of course, they begin this game where they start to say, oh, no, we didn't really mean it. We didn't really accept this. And they were trying to walk this away. Then, as a kind of compromise, J.D. Vance came and said, okay, we'll see, we'll come up with something. And basically, this something was, it's not that the Israelis, it's, the Americans put pressure on the Israelis to not attack Beirut. This is what it seems like until now. So for the past couple of days, the idea is don't attack Beirut, give the Lebanese government something that they can, come and negotiate with Israelis. They can't be doing this when they're attacking Beirut. But the Israelis said, okay, we'll do that for now. I mean, God knows for how long, but at least for now. But we will not stop invading in South Lebanon and killing people in South Lebanon. They hit an ambulance and first responders just today again. I was just reading now before we came online that they've also hit the UNIFIL, the UN peacekeepers in South Lebanon. Again, they've been hitting them quite a bit. So they've now the tank is rammed through a UNIFIL peacekeeping truck. And so, the Israelis are continuing their violence in South Lebanon and killing people and attacking and invading in South Lebanon. We'll see tomorrow when the Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors meet, if anything comes from that, but I suspect not.
So now we heard that more than 1.2 million Lebanese people have been displaced, accounting for about 1/5 of the country's total population. Hospitals are overwhelmed and shelters are overloaded, and the humanitarian crisis is being increasingly severe. Could you introduce to our Chinese audience the difficulties Lebanon is currently facing?
Massive. So as you're saying, we have around a quarter to a third of the population is displaced. So, Lebanon, okay, it's a small country, but it's a quite a densely packed population in a very small country. So when you're talking about a third of the population basically moving from South Lebanon and other parts, but mostly from South Lebanon and the suburbs of Beirut. So in other words, where there's a lot of Shia population and moving towards mixed neighborhoods and other kinds of neighborhoods, it gets very, very concentrated. And people are out. You can, if you walk around in Beirut, you'll see a lot of tents. You'll see a lot of people on the streets. But also, people have been put into the public schools, into the public hospitals, sort of public areas, but also on the streets because there's not enough spaces. There's simply not enough places. And there's not really a proper emergency plan that was enacted to kind of take care of people. So there's a lot of private and personal kind of initiatives and food banks and, people helping each other out in solidarity in that kind of way. But the problem is not just in the physical, and you're talking about a lot of old people, you're talking about a lot of kids. People are out. It's the school year, right? So schools have stopped. It's been now many weeks with no schools. No, what do the kids do? What do the old people do? What do people, if the hospitals are being hit in their areas, in their towns, they can't go to the hospitals. So you have a lot of problems like this, a lot of pressure, on top of which there's a lot of uncertainty. So that means, okay, let's say, okay, it's, 2 days. All right, you manage. 3 days. Okay. But we have no idea. It could be another week, could be another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, a year. There's no idea. So that adds a tremendous amount of pressure, not just first and foremost on these people that are displaced, that are in very precarious conditions, very uncertain conditions. It's humiliating, to leave your home. You just sort of, it's a very unpleasant situation. On top of which, it puts pressure on the host communities, the host areas that have to provide for, in a country where there's been a lot of economic problems. There's been for the past 4 or 5 years, a lot of economic problems in Lebanon. So people, there's a lot of poverty. People can't afford very much. So there's a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of issues that are going on that people are trying to deal with within the communities themselves. And for the most part, it's been dealt with, I would say, in an incredible way. A lot of solidarity. So I'm trying to imagine, let's say there's a billion population of China. I know there's more, but let's just, for a round number, say there's a billion people. You're talking about, imagine if 300 million or 300 million people in China got up from one area and moved to another area in 24 hours. I'm not talking about over 1 month and 6 months. It picked up within less than 24 hours. 300 million pick up and go to neighboring areas, and without let's say there was no, like in China, and there was no national emergency plan. Just picked up, go, and you don't know what's going on. Imagine the strain, imagine the resources that are needed. Imagine what about the host communities in these communities that are receiving all these displaced people. It's truly unimaginable. So if you add that and say it's amazing how much solidarity there has been, on the other hand, there is a lot of tension, and so there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, and the Israelis play on this. They push it. It's part of their tactics. It's part of how they work. It's part of how they operate. And they want to create sectarian problems. So when you're pushing a lot of the Shia population into mixed neighborhoods, which includes sort of, Sunni neighborhoods, Christian neighborhoods, the Israeli idea is to say, okay, if you push them, then they'll create problems with, let's say, the Christian neighborhoods. And they want that. They want there to be fights inside Lebanon. They want there to be civil war inside Lebanon. So far, that hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because, unlike Israel, Lebanon has a very long history of coexistence. People live together. Yeah, there are different sects. In Lebanon, we have recognized 16 different religions in Lebanon, 16 different sects. It's part of the system. We've lived together for hundreds and thousands of years. So there's nothing, it's not a strange thing for people to be mixed together. It's not an issue. Whereas in Israel, as you know, and your audience may know, it's an apartheid state, right? It wants to create only a Jewish state, and it wants to expel anybody who's not Jewish from their lands and from their areas, even if they had been living there for thousands and thousands of years. We're not like that. We live in an area that's full of coexistence, and so these communities, when they try to push and create problems with each other, normally it's okay because we know each other. We live with each other. But after a certain amount of time, and in a war situation, and lack of resources, and the lack of a governmental plan, and an uncertainty, and you don't know how long this is going to go, of course, there's a lot of problems that will come out of this.
Well, I'm gonna be very honest. First, building on what you see, our discussion is gonna be the only Lebanese talking serious international affairs thing with a Chinese guy on Chinese social media. It's the first time. Even we're a huge country with huge population, we never hear anything from Lebanon, serious issues on international affairs. And the reason why I reached out is basically I read the headlines on WAPO and New York Times, and Israel, killing civilians again and again. And I found why they're downplaying the killing of Lebanese civilian. And the causality is about hundreds, right? Normally, if it's let's not even talk about America. If it's about Gaza, several hundred is a big deal. They'll at least have a small chunk, on front page. But Lebanon, no media coverage. For me, we Chinese already grew some kind of instinct to smell where Western media is trying to downplay some stuff they don't want the world to know. I found, okay, there are a lot of casualties, they're killing civilians, and I reached out, I found, okay, they're downplaying. Because China is oftentimes the biggest so-called villain by Western media. The China bashing is more popular sports in Western media. So I reached out and found the atrocity and the tragedy that no Western mainstream media is reporting the atrocities happening in Lebanon. Do you think there is indeed an, cocoon deliberately created by Israel, including that mainstream Western media, rarely report on what's happening in Lebanon and downplaying anything and maybe to kill the international reporters to restrain them from or to terrify them from reporting the fact?
100%. The mainstream media, including the outlets that you mentioned, the Washington Post and the others, and the big kind of networks, right? The mainstream media, anything to do with the Israelis has been, if you try to criticize the Israelis, it's become kind of basically criminalized in the United States. The mainstream media has been bought out by very, very pro-Zionist groups and billionaires. They, as you probably very well know, TikTok in the United States was eventually forced to sell the American branch, let's say, of TikTok, not because, at the beginning they said, it's because it's Chinese propaganda and they're selling, Chinese spyware and this, that, the other. We know for a fact that had nothing to do with China. And in this case, for once, it had nothing to do with China. It had to do with TikTok was the primary source where young people in America could see live what was going on in the Gaza genocide in Palestine. So they could see it. They're looking at their screens, and they were not looking at the New York Times or the mainstream media that would then protect the Israelis and say it's all terrorists and this kind of stuff. They were seeing children being starved, children being destroyed, houses and hospitals being utterly hit in plain sight, villages destroyed, women crying, all this incredible stuff in a genocide. In front of our collective eyes, these young people, for the first time in the United States, were watching it live on their phones, on their iPhones and on the other phones that they have, and their screens and their iPads and whatever. The response to that was that the United States forced TikTok to sell its American branch to a arch Zionist. So a Zionist billionaire bought it, and almost overnight, anything to do with Palestine was removed from all the TikTok videos. So you can see that's the way in which they've operated. So the social media during the Gaza genocide opened up the eyes to a lot of people in America who had never been allowed to see these kinds of images, and finally understood what the Israelis were doing in Palestine and now in Lebanon. And that's why you see a massive, massive, massive shift of public opinion, especially among young people in America, away from being sympathetic to the Israelis because they never saw properly. They were always sold the propaganda in the mainstream media, to being very anti-Israeli, not because of anything beyond seeing that how can you see a force kill babies and starve babies and not react against it? I mean, you really have to be inhuman to look at that and not have this reaction, regardless of your politics, irrelevant of the politics. But they can see, and they can see the Israelis doing it on purpose, and they see the Israeli soldiers putting on TikTok, by the way, and other social media to say, yeah, look here, they put themselves, they go into houses and they put women's lingerie. You're selling you women's lingerie. They go in, they kill the women, and then they put their lingerie on and they make little games. Or they go into a baby place and they pretend they're babies. It's sick. And they put it, the Israeli soldiers themselves put it on their own TikTok or their own, social media channels, Telegram or other channels. So you have a situation where the Israelis have lost out in the public opinion in the United States big time, in the Democratic Party and now increasingly among the Republican Party, on the right and on the left. And this is causing a huge shift in this kind of public opinion. So yes, there is a sense of people finally understanding that the Israelis, have committed genocide and today are committing massacres inside Lebanon, And at the same time, the portrayal of Arabs, whether Palestinians or Lebanese or others, as terrorists, right? So the Chinese is portrayed as this kind of big monster that's coming to eat us all. The Arabs, of course, are portrayed as terrorists and, evil and stuff like this. It's the same machine that does both. So now people are opening their eyes about what's going on in our countries. The problem is that the president of the United States is still very much, responds to Israeli interests, and the Congress in the United States is still very much controlled by the Israel lobby. But this is changing, and I see in the next year or two there'll be big changes in the United States that will reflect this change in popular opinion.
So there's still a long way to go because there's still 3 years for Trump's presidency. So what do you think the international community can do to help with the crisis situation Israel caused in Lebanon?
Well, the international community, first and foremost, has to come in, and including through the UN Security Council, they have to come in and say, enough. Stop the war. Remove your occupation. Stop killing and assassinating and burn. It's not just that they're destroying villages. They literally, when they destroy the villages, you can see them on the maps. They destroy villages, and then they spray chemicals. They use chemical weapons to kill the earth, to kill the soil, because it's a very fertile ground. People in South Lebanon grow, it's agriculture. And very, very old olive trees, ancient olive trees including. And they kill these olive trees, they kill the agriculture, they literally kill not just people, but the soil itself. So people can't go back and kind of grow the crops again, So there has to be a stop to the war, there has to be a stop to the occupation, there has to be a full withdrawal, and they have to abide by humanitarian law. This is first and foremost. In Gaza and Palestine, they have to end the genocide immediately. In Gaza, they have to end the ethnic cleansing that's taking place in the West Bank, and they have to abide by international law and international humanitarian law. That's very clear what needs to be done. The problem is that this international community has failed Palestine, it's failed the Palestinians, it's failed the Lebanese, and it's failed a lot of people in the region. This is a huge problem. People look to China and they say, where's China in this? And, people, would like China to be more vocal as part of the international community. I mean, you understand, of course, China is not going to get involved militarily at this point, but it's not about a military thing. And they do say the right things when it comes to the UN, but to be more forceful at the diplomatic, at the political level, to hear their voice more, to try to end these wars. I think this is very important. China, I think, plays an important role, not just because it's this huge country and great power now, etc., and all these things, but also, China is not an old colonial power. People understand that. China hasn't colonized countries. China hasn't invaded countries. So, we know that China has a kind of basic empathy with people that have been colonized. China has been colonized, right? So we understand that. And so the hope is, it's not that China is going to come in militarily. It's not that at all. We need big countries to stand up politically, diplomatically, and say enough. Enough is enough. We have to stop this bloodshed. We have to stop these wars.
I'm gonna at least state this because there is a Chinese military officer got killed by Israeli bombardment in 2006, actually in Lebanon.
That's right.
It's a military observer from the UN in Lebanon. So we sent military watcher, and Israel used precise bombardment to kill him. So even we're a big country, and we also witnessing the tragedy of UN not able to do what it needs to do because the US will veto anyways since I think 1967 or something, before I was even born. So maybe the lesson is, if you've been experiencing Israel killing the civilians in Lebanon since you was born, so what are some way out here to solve, at least, maybe not the whole problem of the Middle East, but maybe solve Israel impunity and bring at least some rest peace for the suffering civilians?
Well, I think it's been on the international agenda for a long time. You need to have the settlement of the question of Palestine. The question of Palestine is at the center of the conflict of the Middle East, including the Iran war today. Because the question of Palestine includes the Israelis. So you have a settler colonial movement, which is Zionism, which came to Palestine, ethnically cleansed the indigenous population, the Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, by the way, but we don't think like that, right? They ethnically cleansed the indigenous population there, and then they settled in these things, and then they occupied, and then they expanded, including they want to expand into Lebanon, they want to expand into Syria, they want to expand into Egypt, and now they're fighting this war with Iran because Iran is the only great power in the region, a regional great power that's able to be a balance with the Israelis. So they are trying to get the United States to destroy Iran in order that there can only be one great power in this whole region here, and that's the Israelis. What needs to happen at all costs is to stop the Israelis, first of all, immediately for the genocide itself, immediate stopping, because still today, although it's no longer in the news, they're still killing people in Gaza every single day. They're not complying with the ceasefire in Gaza at all. They are expanding and they're doing killing people across the West Bank now. The settlers, these crazy settlers, fundamentalist, religious fundamentalist settlers that are invading and attacking and killing people in the West Bank. They are pushing further into Syria and occupying Syrian territory, and they're pushing further into Lebanon, trying to occupy southern Lebanon. So all of this is happening at the same time, and they're bombing Yemen, and they're bombing Iran, and they bomb everything and everywhere across this region. This needs to stop immediately. The Israelis need to be told, if you want to survive and if you want to stay, you need to accept that there are the indigenous Palestinian population. You have to deal with them. They have the right to self-determination, and there has to be a just settlement, which is what the UN has said for decades, which is the Chinese position, which is the European position, which is the position of every country on earth, including the United States today, and the Israelis themselves. So the question is, do we want to live in a world where it simply might makes right? I come and I put the gun and I force you to do something. Is that the world we want to live in? Or do we want to live in a world where there are international laws, where there are limits to violence, where there are limits to the use of certain kinds of weapons, where there's humanitarian law, where there's rights to self-determination? We need to choose our world. The vast majority of the world chooses to have proper international law, humanitarian law, rights to self-determination, and justice. The Israelis are against all of this thing, and so far, unfortunately, America has supported them in this thing. I think we're coming to the end of that. I think the US will no longer support Israel, a year or 2 or 3 from now, and that will kind of change the dynamics of the region. In the meantime, the other powers, including China and the Europeans and the other powers, need to be talking. But they need to be more vocal. They need to go to the UN Security Council and pass resolutions to impose a certain kind of idea, a certain kind of settlement, say enough is enough. The international community is sick of the Israelis occupying, attacking, invading, killing, ethnically cleansing, and committing genocide. They have to be part of the international world, the international community, and they have to abide by those laws and rules that everyone else has to. China has to, Lebanon has to, Egypt has to, the whole world has to, but not the Israelis. Why? We need to finish with this. And there has to be an international effort to stop them from doing this. And this is the way, but we start with at least humanitarian laws. You can't kill children. You can't starve children. You can't ethnically cleanse villages. You cannot destroy civilian infrastructure. You cannot create violence and terrorism across big areas of land across the region. You cannot do that. You can't invade Iran. Whether you like the Iranian regime or not is not relevant. It's not material, It doesn't make, it's not even do I like or do I not like. It's irrelevant. You are not allowed to invade another country. There has to be rules and laws, otherwise it's totally chaotic. So this is it. My final point here is to say the way we deal with the Israelis and with Palestine especially, and this whole area, is either we say, is how we reflect it. Either we say we want to have laws and rules and institutions and ways to run the world in a way that is based on justice and cooperation, or we go with the Israeli way, which is you use your violence and you get whatever you want and nobody can tell you anything. It's a choice. Over the past 2-3 years, starting with the genocide in Gaza until now in Lebanon, the international community has spoken, but they've turned a blind eye. They've looked the other way. They said, oh, no, we don't want, but they've done nothing. That's the truth. Nothing has happened. The genocide in Gaza, people look the other way. A lot of people worked against it, but the states at the Security Council at the UN, they looked the other way. That's the reality. Despite the speeches, they didn't do anything. The Secretary General didn't do anything. So there needs to be a choice. If you let them do this in Gaza, maybe the audience might think, okay, who cares? It's just Gaza. It's a small place. If you let that happen in a place like Gaza and then in Lebanon, okay, small countries, we're not the most important countries in the world. That's true. But if you let that happen, then it will happen in another country, another one, then everybody does this to the other countries. Then what? So it's not just a question of looking who cares about Lebanon, who cares about Palestine. It's so far away from China. I mean, it's just, it's a different reality, a different world. Yeah, that's true for most Chinese. On the other hand, it creates, for the whole global system, it means there are no rules. And does China, do the Chinese people, do people want to live in a world where there are no rules? Where you can't trade, where you can't go and you can't come without feeling like you're going to be threatened? So the implications are global. It's not just local. It's not just saying, oh, I feel bad for a Palestinian. Oh, I feel bad for the Lebanese. I mean, I think that's important. That's true. But the larger implications are, we're not just killing Lebanese and Palestinians and Iranians now. That's happening, but that's not like at the global level, you're breaking the laws, you're breaking the institutions, you're breaking the idea of cooperation, the idea of saying, if you come to an agreement, if there's a treaty, you have to respect it. The Israelis don't respect any agreement. So you do a ceasefire and then they're still killing and attacking. You do a cessation of hostilities, they attack. You do a deal, they break the deal. So imagine you and me now, we sign a contract, you say, I'm going to buy 10 pairs of shoes that you're selling me. And then I just take your 10 and I don't pay you. I mean, what are you going to do? So what kind of a world is that? If I sign a contract with you and then I don't pay, you give me your shoes and I don't pay you. What kind of a world is that? So this is what the Israelis are doing. And if the world allows this to happen in Gaza and in Lebanon and in this area, this is what will happen to the rest of the world. So that implication is very important for the audience to understand, even if they're very far away, and even if this is not like the biggest concern to their daily lives. It concerns the entire world because it's the way that it operates and the implication to the entire global system that is at stake here.
Well, Professor, our minds is one. That's basically one of the main reasons why I started this episode and why I started program, reaching out to all the Palestinian global human rights defenders and activists from Global Sumu Flotilla and Gaza Freedom Flotilla. I am, and I think I will be the only individual Chinese influencer hosting these guys because many think it's risky. It's far from China. Yeah. But we're starting from 0 to 1. You're the first Lebanese voice from Lebanon to address the Chinese audience. I think building on that, one day the caring Chinese youth will understand why we're doing this and the importance of getting together, unify, solidarity, and make a better world for our children and end this vicious circle. So thank you, Professor, for today. I'm sure we're going to have you again on Chinese social media to make more caring Chinese youth know your thoughts, know what about Lebanese and neglected truths of tragedy happening in Lebanon. Thank you for today.
Thank you very much.